the way it's going to change how we work, obviously, is going to go far beyond recruiting. It's going to change the way tons of people work.
Meet Siadhal Magos, the co-founder and CEO of Metaview. In this episode of the Recruiting Better podcast, he joined me to talk about the growing role of AI in the recruitment industry.
There's so much about how we work that we all get frustrated about that would be great if we didn't have to do anymore. And guess what? There's a fundamentally new technology that's now highly likely going to be able to do at least some of those things. So
Siadhal is at the forefront of AI development and adoption. To help you stay up to speed, he shared advice like...
So one way to sort of think about almost the change that's occurred here is if you increasingly think of these conversations as data, actually being able to sort of grow this corpus of data of, hey, this is how the hires, this is literally the game tape of how we did this previously, and using that as a training asset for everyone else is a massive improvement.
Listen to find out more about how you can bring AI into your workflow. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please give it a like if you do, and if you have any questions that you'd like to put to me or to future guests, join the Recruiting Better community. The link, as always, is in the show notes. But for now, let's jump in. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Recruiting Better podcast with me, Ben Browning. This time I'm joined by Siadhal Magos. Siadhal is founder of Metaview, an AI platform that is revolutionizing the way that recruiters, both on the agency and in-house teams, work. We're going to be covering a really wide range of topics here, in particular focusing on the role of AI in recruitment, the way that recruiters can be far more productive, and a subject you'll know is close to my heart, the way that agency recruiters can transform the way that employers hire to win better clients, better business, and better terms. So Siadhal, thanks so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Ben. Really pumped to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. So let's start at the start then. For anybody living under a rock, can you explain to us what Metaview is?
Absolutely. So Metaview is an AI co-pilot built specifically for recruiters and recruiting professionals, focused very much on how we can make it so that recruiters can focus much more on the human-to-human interactions that are like such a core part of their job, and often the part of their job that they actually like most or love most in some cases. What that means very practically is Metaview has a bunch of features. Probably the most prominent is our AI note taker. So we have an AI that takes notes for you from your interviews. These notes are ridiculously high quality. What I mean by that is not that there's a full transcript, although there is that, more that we actually pull out all of the pertinent information from a conversation for you so that you don't have to do it during your calls with candidates. The reasons people really champion, advocate, and love Metaview is because that means you can focus much more on actually building rapport and getting to know, maybe even persuading and influencing the candidate, which obviously a lot of recruiters are so great at, instead of having to take notes at the same time. And then the second thing is it makes it far more efficient when it comes to writing up your candidate summaries to present to clients, because our AI has done, most people will say, somewhere in the order of magnitude 80 to 90% of that work for you. So you end up saving a ton of time as a result. So yeah, that's what Metaview is. You should definitely check it out.
Fantastic. And look, one of the reasons that I was really keen to have you on the show and share the work that you're doing with the audience here, as you say, is this kind of combination of both pushing forward and leveling up the quality of interviews through using AI to enable recruiters to do more of that human interaction piece, right? And you mentioned in our previous conversation offline that there's this huge amount of uplift for opportunity for recruiters in terms of that productivity piece, so the time that they save, but also there's this real facilitation of a greater connection between recruiters and the person they're interviewing. Was it the starting point? Was that the kind of the main problem you were looking to solve as you started to build the product, or was there something else that really drove this?
An initial sort of kernel level idea was not that, actually. So my background before starting Metaview was as a hiring manager in high growth companies. So not as a sort of bag carrying recruiter myself at all. And my impression just from that hiring manager seat was much more around just the raw importance of these conversations, because they literally determine who we end up hiring and bringing into this company. And when you're growing fast, that means you're a different company in a year's time, and it's all based on these conversations that you have. So really just came at the problem from, hey, these conversations are really important. I think we could be doing more to just enable people to do a better job in them. And then as I went deeper and deeper into understanding, obviously I worked very closely with recruiters in these previous companies, and now I guess dedicate my life to helping recruiters. So I spend a ton of time with them now. You sort of increasingly realize in many ways the technology was previously like getting in the way. Like, oh, because I have this requirement that I need to put information into this system after the call, and that's essentially the vestige of this call is whatever I manage to write and then put into this system, whether it's the CRM or the ATS or whatever it might be. Actually, the quality of those human-to-human interactions is suffering, and yet that's the thing that I was actually good at. And actually, if I have the mental bandwidth to focus on that human-to-human interaction, I can probably do this sort of, laundry list of things that make a great interview. However, if you're telling me, hey, this is what a great interview looks like, and you need to sort of be constantly hammering at your keyboard, then I'm going to really struggle. So it was sort of a roundabout. It was very much a big problem that we sort of identified around just the importance of these types of conversations, yet then people not being able to execute them excellently. And then we sort of quickly honed in on, well, actually, what if we reduced the amount of other things they have to do? Would that help people? And we're finding that's really resonating and ending up being true. Basically, it does help them a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And it makes so much sense to me. It seems so intuitive, and it's, I guess, a product of where we are in terms of the proportion of interviews that are happening remotely over Zoom now, and the opportunity that the development in the tech and the AI itself kind of gives us as well. So it feels like a really intuitive step and a really powerful move in the right direction. And as I understand it, you feel as well that the use of AI can really redefine recruitment, maybe even save recruitment, if I've understood right.
Yeah, I have a really strong conviction around the positive influence of AI. I mean, on the world for sure. Like I am definitely an optimist from that perspective around the technology, and I think the way it's going to change how we work, obviously, is going to go far beyond recruiting. It's going to change the way tons of people work. There are predictions around, in 5 years' time, 80% of code will be written by AI co-pilots, and we're seeing more and more music or like art forms generated by AI, and so it's going to obviously have transformative impact. Specifically with recruiting, the reason I think it's going to be a net massive positive for recruiting is because humans are at the center of our work. You get a bunch of roles in the world that are where humans are not the center of your work. Actually, the center of your work might be moving pixels on a screen or typing letters on a, providing output in that way. Whereas recruiting is, and maybe HR more broadly, but I say specifically recruiting is the most human centric. It might not have felt like it to people who are in the industry because of all of these things they have to do on the side, but in reality, the crux of it is very human centric, and that is the thing that is last on the list in terms of things that are going to be, automated by AI. It will be augmented by AI. Don't get me wrong. That doesn't mean, hey, don't change what you're doing, keep on doing what you're doing, you'll be fine. It will be augmented. But in terms of actually sort of the central column of recruiting, which is matching humans with other humans, given all of the things going on in their life, in the candidate's life, and all of the things going on within this organization, which is again just like a group of humans, that is, that's multifaceted. That's going to require people to get to know people even better. And that's why I think it's really well placed to do well out of AI, because actually a lot of the things that are around recruiting, updating, CRMs or scheduling or maybe sourcing, even though you've spoken to 1,000 candidates in the past, your ability to recall all those is very, 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 very challenging. All of those things, yes, those will be heavily, heavily impacted by AI. But the core, the interacting with human beings, understanding, is this person going to make this person tick? Are they going to work well with this? That's not going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah, no, I hear that. It's really interesting. Long-time listeners to the show will recall that John Brooks from the Value Advantage Recruitment's pricing specialist was a sponsor for the first series of the show, and in the read that we had, he sponsored the show, and we had a question that he would put to the audience every week. And the context of that question was, given that every recognized, or certainly a vast number of the most recognizable CEOs and business leaders over the last 100 years have said that people are their biggest asset. Why isn't the way we hire seen as a greater opportunity to become a competitive advantage? And it feels as though Metaview and the work that you're doing is really kind of tapping into that conversation as well.
100%. That is, Metaview was founded by, first and foremost, technologists. Like, we are more technologists maybe than we are sort of people with recruiting backgrounds, for sure. And obviously, when you're thinking about how to spend your energy as a technologist, you're thinking about what's a good way to have impact. Of course, where's there an opportunity to build a great company as well, but also, like, where's the biggest impact? And that is the biggest reason why people in our team get out of bed every day, even after the hard days, hard weeks, or whatever it might be, is deep belief in just the vital importance of constructing the right teams. We put it at even when we onboard new people to our team, put it at a very basic level. Any impact that is had in the world, any change you see occurring in the world, is a result of organizations, and organizations are just groups of people who have been recruited. Now, they have a recruiter involved. I don't know. It doesn't. In some cases, no, but in most cases, yes. So it is vitally important. I do think there are companies who are at the top of the game who do take this stuff incredibly seriously. I'm sure a lot of the listeners and the agencies they work with have many of these folks as clients. And I do think, I just think maybe one of the things that happen is companies hustle and sprint to get to a position of power, and then they create a talent advantage off the back of that. Do you know what I mean? Because they have the sort of space to really think about how to, our talent brand and who we're hiring and training people, of course. So a lot of the most elite and most sort of storied companies on the planet, of course, do take this incredibly seriously. I just think it's such a slow but compounding thing that it's really hard for companies that aren't already at the top to sort of, take it as seriously as they should.
Yeah, indeed. And even the piece there, though, and I think we'll move on to talk a little bit about the role of the work that you do, particularly in assessing talent. I want to come to a question on that in a moment, but there is something about that piece of, you're right, a business will take time to go, will look to grow rapidly and then kind of almost get hiring right from that position. But actually, for me, and from my experience in recruitment, like, a lot of that about being, like, when I think about who the best businesses at hiring are, often that is a lot about they've got a status and a prestige that enables them to attract the best talent. It isn't necessarily that they are it isn't necessarily the assessment piece almost doesn't come first. When I work with recruiters, I talk about transforming the way that employers hire really in three ways. First of all, defining roles and defining requirements in the most effective way possible. Then moving into the assessment strategy and defining an effective assessment strategy. And then finally looking at the way that you attract candidates into that funnel. And as I say, it seems to me as though most of, certainly the brands that we think of as being best at hiring, do the attraction piece really well. They kind of got a leg up on that front. But actually the other two pieces, defining exactly what they need, and what we see at the moment all the time with SaaS companies and tech companies and the redundancies they're making shortly after going through big hiring bursts, but also the assessment piece. It was kind of lopsided. So again, I'm really excited in the work that you're doing around making assessment easier and making assessment better. I think that's really obviously those companies who are in this position of having this great talent brand that great people want to work for. That's what I mean about the compounding benefit. That's something that they made sure was something that was baked in before they were the hottest ticket in town. And what happens, of course, is people join the company, they're surrounded by great people. They may even go on to leave the company, but then think, hey, those people I used to work with back that was the sort of the highest bar I ever worked, and that just spreads. So I still think I think a lot of the sort of talent, the ability to attract great talent when you're more well known, is still determined by your ability to assess for it before you are incredibly well known. Because of course, companies that aren't having, hundreds of top tier applicants, your job is to some extent find those diamonds, and assessment. Your alpha is always going to be assessment. Can you identify someone that other people are overlooking, or
if you do get in front of them, are you in some way so sort of persuasive and influential during that experience that they decide to join you? And of course, this comes back to why conversations are so important, because especially in this predominantly where hiring is done predominantly remotely. If you think about the context of that candidate, one great thing for the sort of the challenger talent brands is that you can now it's probably easier to get interviews with candidates because, okay, well, I don't have to literally like take half a day off work and travel to your office and all these sorts of things. So I'll give you that call. The downside is you just look the same as every other company because they're sat in the same place as they are doing the rest of their day's work. They might have interviews with two different companies back to back. And the only difference is the person who's on the other end of the screen. It's the same sort of like furniture on the screen they're looking at, all of that stuff. So the only way you have of differentiating yourself is actually that conversation, which is another reason they become almost more important than they are before. You know, they're not picking up the office vibe. They're not seeing, you know, how many ping pong tables you have or whatever it might be. They're just getting the experience of the person who's on the other end of the video conference or whatever it might be.
Yeah, totally. And the AI, the kind of the stuff that you've got in Metaview, as you say, with taking interview notes enables you to then focus fully on the conversation, so to be more engaged, presumably do a better job of assessing the person you're speaking to, but also do a more convincing and compelling job of actually selling the opportunity, making that interview really a fully two-way piece.
Winning high quality new business is more difficult than ever. And as you know, we are strong advocates of using email in your BD outreach. But we also know that using email outreach campaigns is more and more difficult. Google and Yahoo have upped the bar in terms of what they consider to be spam, and so working to create great results from email campaigns is more and more difficult. And if you're sending messages at volume from your primary domain, you really need to be worried about domain health. Not to mention the fact that only the most hyper-relevant, hyper-tailored content is going to get the kinds of responses you want from your clients. Our partner Outstation does all of the heavy lifting for you. It's an amazing tool that runs end-to-end services from data collection through segmentation, through using AI to really target and get specific about who you're sending messages to. Is a real game changer in terms of the way that we use both a combination of technology and that human touch. Outstation goes a level beyond anything that we've ever seen before. And we've got clients all over the world in different sectors across recruitment who are getting fantastic results just from using the tools at Outstation. If you want to check it out, head to the show notes. There's a link there for you. And if you go through to their page, they will give you 15% off a discount from your first order. So go check out Outstation, change your results from your email campaigns, and it'll help you win more business.
What about the data and the opportunities that recruiters stand to gain from in the data that they get out of using AI and from a platform like Metaview?
Yeah, and obviously there's uses of AI within recruiting beyond Metaview, of course. So people should definitely, based on the problem they're trying to solve, think about other maybe even completely like almost unrelated things. But the things that we focus on are, one is, as you said, is can we do the job of that note taking? So that mental parsing you're doing, which is a data problem, by the way. You're trying to extract which pieces of data that this candidate is giving me are actually the most important. Now, the way Metaview works is obviously we capture all of those data points, what we think of as an utterance, everything someone says, we obviously capture. And those are essentially by our models aggregated together into sentences, of course, that have different semantic meaning. And we extract, well, what are the most important sentences, insights that we derive from this conversation based on the questions that were answered, and increasingly over the questions that were asked, and increasingly over time that will be based on the job description or based on the rec you received from the client or based on the intake meeting you had with the client. What do we know is the most important information from this call? And so our AI does that all for you, of like matching up what is the most important information. So that's one data asset for sure. It's the core of the product. We've already spoken about that. You should still think about that as data. The other thing that our AI enables is for you to essentially query this data, but in a very natural way. So depending on the sort of experience of your listeners with sort of various like data extraction methods, but most of the time, historically, the way you would go about retrieving data from a large data set is someone will have had to structure that data in some way, which is sort of what your CRM forces you to do, like put this type of information here, put this type of information here, and tick this box if this was true and select this from a drop down. And that was like how you would go and capture data about the candidates you spoke to. Many folks will still be doing that, of course. But anyway, historically, you'd have to structure the data, and then you'd have some very clunky way of being able to pull that data out, which would usually be maybe even like writing some type of code to pull the data out, or using some type of dashboarding interface to try and get an insight you want. And people always struggled. The big thing that's different with AI broadly and Metaview specifically is you can now query data just using natural language. Like, what is the thing you want to know? Just like ChatGPT, just write it in. Hey, I'd like to know which candidates we've spoken to in the last 6 months that have told us they're willing to relocate to London from the US or something like that. And Metaview will, without anyone having had to structure anything, will find those candidates within this sort of sea, this vast ocean of data you have from all the conversations you had. So one way to sort of think about almost the change that's occurred here is if you increasingly think of these conversations as data, like there's like a spigot of data that's just firing all the time. All the time your agents are speaking to different candidates, or if you're an agent yourself speaking to a consultant yourself speaking to candidates. That's just a hose pipe of data that you're receiving. Historically, you've been picking up pieces of it and funneling even fewer pieces of it into your CRM and storing some pieces of it in your memory banks, but not actually written down anywhere. Now you can ask your AI assistant, and hopefully that will be Metaview, just questions about all of those things that you've heard and find those candidates or find those moments. And that could be the use cases we see for that are ones like I mentioned, like, hey, I'm trying to source candidates actually, and we have these very particular requirements. And I know I've spoken to, however many 100 candidates in the last couple of years. So there's bound to be some in there that satisfy that. That's very important. More frequently, actually, it's things like, oh, okay, I've recommended a client speak to a candidate. They've asked me a follow-up question about them before they speak to them. I don't have that information literally at the top of my mind, but I think we spoke about something related. Let me just ask my AI and it will remind me, show me that moment, maybe show me that snippet, and then I can get back to the client. So it is data. So I think your question was like around, hey, what about the data? What can we do with the data? But it's data in a it's utilizing the data in a pragmatic, workflow-centric way, as opposed to, some new charts for you to look at, necessarily.
Yeah. Wow. I'm just thinking that through, and I've been familiar with the product for a while, and just every time I think about those use cases of, as you say, the hundreds or thousands of, well, tens of thousands of candidates that recruiters have got in their database right now, all those conversations that they've had, and all those little bits of information that we lose, or we don't recall, or we don't track, and just having access to not only be able to store that data, but actually to interrogate it and to find those bits of conversation, I think is just an awesome opportunity. Yeah, and then the second piece that you mentioned as well, those follow-up questions from hiring managers when they say, so can you tell me a little bit about, what's this? But we're a bit concerned about this candidate. What's that commute going to be like? You can actually go back to them with the specific kind of language or answer that the candidate gave when it came up on the call.
Yeah, totally.
It's brilliant. And I guess also because of that increases recruiter capacity, because I imagine that particularly, and maybe this applies maybe more to internal recruiters and agency recruiters, although not exclusively. If a recruiter is, I remember vividly this time last year, I was working with a consultant who sent me, we were trying to book a time for a meeting. He sent me a screenshot of his diary, and he had something like 25 screening calls with candidates booked in a 2.5 day period. I was like, that is a lot of conversation. By the end of that period, he's going to then have to go back through and think about who he wants to shortlist for his clients. How is he actually going to be able to recall how he went about that?
Yeah, I mean, unless he was a Metaview customer, he's not.
Yeah, exactly. But I love the idea that we can increase recruiter capacity for that.
Yeah.
Whilst also not losing sight of the human elements and really support and lifting that up.
Yeah.
The other question that comes to mind for me on this is, I think we talked about this offline, but have you got recruiters who are using the kind of the Metaview technology or something similar around taking job briefings and job intake calls?
Yes, so Metaview is very focused on, recruiting calls more broadly. We talk about interviews a lot just because that's obviously the vast majority of the volume and most connected to higher quality, which is another sort of important thing to us. But at the end of the day, who we serve are recruiters, and that's not the only type of meetings that are important to recruiters to help them do their jobs. Intake meetings as well. So we have a particular a model, a fine-tuned model to pull out when you have your intake meeting. We essentially produce your spec off the back of it. For you to go and take to the next level. To be clear, this is not, hey, spec ready for you now. It's more, again, like 80% of the way there, and you can adapt, but just saves you a ton of time, which obviously comes back to obviously the capacity for you as a recruiter to maybe even take on more business. And the other sort of models we have are around debriefs. Sometimes obviously agency recruiters will get involved in debriefs for candidates at the end of the process, like when everyone's sharing their opinion about the candidate. So we've got a really good model for that as well, where it sort of breaks all the sort of the positives and the negatives down and separates them all for you. Essentially, any job, any sort of vital conversation in a recruiter's life where they feel that their ability to be an active and sort of influential member of that conversation is lessened by the fact that they're also being asked to be the scribe. Metaview does that for you. That's one of our products, one of our features is to do that for you. And so at the moment we cover a bunch of conversations beyond interviews as well.
Yeah, and I really resonate with that point, because there's so many times as a recruiter I've been sat in meetings feeling like my main job is capturing the information here. Actually, when I can pass that on, when I can outsource that, and then focus on steering the conversation, that enables me to become really consultative. It enables me to question things more effectively. It gives me the bandwidth to be able to do that. I love it. It's Richard Cho. So
Richard Cho is from Metaview perspective, he's an advisor for us. Obviously, then the question is, well, who is he, and why is he one of our advisors? So he's first and foremost a very early adopter of Metaview. When he was the recruiting leader at Robinhood, obviously hyper growth at the time, US tech company. Before that, he worked for at the time Facebook, now Meta, for a chunk of time. The Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which is the sort of the charity that Mark Zuckerberg set up and along with his wife, off the back of Facebook, and a bunch of other sort of just storied tech companies, I would say, that he's truly been the sort of the operational leader of hiring at. So, we're talking like blitz scaling those companies. He's the sort of guy that doesn't talk loads, but when he talks, like, a lot of people listen. He's an advisor to Metaview, as I said, early adopter. Always had, and when all my interactions with him from early on, he was so focused on, most importantly, like leveling up recruiting as the functions that he was responsible for, but then also the industry more broadly. He went on to become chief recruiting officer at Gem, for example, and a bunch of other sort of great roles. So yeah, that's who he is, and really thoughtful guy who we go to a lot for advice on roadmap, but also like more commercial things like positioning and how we want to talk about the company. And I think the thing that's one of the reasons he's so perfect for us is because we have a bunch of customers that are in-house talent teams. We have a lot of customers that are external agency recruiting teams as well. And I've always found that his style is very, he's sort of like, the way he thinks about recruiting is not unique to either of those. It's sort of the thing that both of these types of recruiting have in common, when they're done at a high level, which is the relationship is at the center of it. If you want to land this remarkable talent, for whether you're in-house with a hyper growth tech company, or whether you're an agency that's supporting an important client, if you want to land these sort of like world-class talents, it's really hard to go from zero to land that talent. Like you have to have those relationships, and I think that's true across all of our customers, is this ability to actually start to think about almost the equity in your own career that you can build up by being able to focus more on those relationships, as opposed to, again, as we talked about previously, being the scribe, has always been really important to him and his teams. He tries to push that on his teams to think about their career in that way too. And so, yeah, there's been a lot of alignment between us and him. And hence he became an advisor.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. I read a little bit into his background, and one of the things I saw in his press statement about joining you guys, well, there were two things that he mentioned. The first one was something we've already talked about, using technology to uncover enough signal to make sound decisions in hiring. Again, we talked earlier about the idea that I'm strongly of the view that recruiters could be doing more to support businesses sorting out their assessment strategy, and as a result, become more valuable to the employers that they work with. But he went on in that press statement to say, Richard went on in that press statement to say that Metaview has the potential to 10x both interview quality and interview velocity. So I wonder if you can maybe share a little bit about what you think he might have seen in the platform on those two things, on both interview quality and interview velocity or hiring velocity.
Yeah. There's like a few really sort of I guess like strong levers that both Richard believes that we can pull, and obviously we believe we can pull to get there. We obviously think for a lot of folks we're somewhere near there for them already, just with the focused products we have. But if you think about if you fast forward even 6 months, 12 months after adopting something like Metaview, and let's imagine the way Richard thinks about things obviously is adopting it as an organization. We have many people who just adopt it as individuals because of their personal productivity gains. Richard was thinking, of course, it from a more organizational wide perspective. Not only do you have this scenario where, of course, you have just human beings on the other end of the Zoom or the Google Meet or the Microsoft Teams with candidates who are doing a better job, and you have that multiplied across the hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of people who are involved in interviewing. But you also now have this growing training asset. So all the time you're cycling in new people who are going to be doing these interviews, and they have essentially no idea what came before. Okay, this is a really successful company. We got to the point where we're now, however many 100 or 1,000 people in the company, we've raised this much money, or we've hit these profit milestones, or whatever it might be. Part of that was because we hired great people. Now we're going to ask completely different people to be responsible for hiring, and they've got no idea how the previous people did it. So actually being able to sort of grow this corpus of data of, hey, this is how the hires, this is literally the game tape of how we did this previously, and using that as a training asset for everyone else is a massive improvement. And just to relay that to both quality and velocity, which most of the time people think quality and velocity are in tension with each other. Most of the time they are in tension with each other, right? You either choose speed or you choose quality. Again, hiring is a little bit different because a fast process is also a good process. It gives you a much better chance of hiring the quality person too. And if there's a couple of things that are really important about if you think about this training as a way to calibrate interviewers, to get them to understand, get them to know what great looks like. One, it means more people who get to the end of the process will accept offers rather than dealing with higher rejection rates, which means you have to start the search or start the interview loops all over again. So there's both a quality and a speed impact there. Two, you're more able, if you're more calibrated, you're more able to weed out the weak candidates earlier in the funnel, as opposed to having lots of weak candidates taking up these sort of really important later stages of the funnel. When you have lots of weak candidates in the lower end of the funnel, it means when you have a hot candidate at the top of the funnel, you can only schedule them for their final interview 2 or 3 weeks out. So you have increased your chance of losing them, and you increase the chance that you might hire someone who was actually not optimal in the meantime anyway. So there's like a ton of ways where these all sort of coalesce to make it really hard to substantially move the needle without actually having an understanding of what's happening in our interviews. And then the third and final piece, which I think maybe is really when if you want to get up to the sort of the echelons of the 10x, is if you can start to have an understanding, and this again applies to agency and in-house teams, of what were the things we learned during the interview process about the people who go on to be top performers. Can we, given you have that information now because it's being captured, can we start to filter for that earlier in the process, so we have like much more thorough filtering? B, make sure we land these people who exhibit a lot of these qualities. Then you can again really sort of change the complexion of your organization. And the C there is hold people accountable to it. Now, one thing about hiring is really not really so much a problem in the agency world from a making sure you fill the role and these sort of things. There's very clear accountability there. But from a quality of hire perspective, there's quite low accountability across the board. Even for the company themselves. Like when I was at Uber, for example, I was part of the interviewer pool. So of course I was interviewing people who I might actually literally never see again. Now, obviously I was a good corporate citizen and I still like took it incredibly seriously and all these things, but it's really easy to not frankly care about that too much because nothing bad was going to happen to me if I didn't do a good job in that interview or make a good recommendation or anything. There's no accountability. And so I think you start to bring out accountability too, which again changes recruiting from a sort of what you said at the start. Hey, we know this is really important. We just don't know how to do it well. So let's just do our best. Let's just do our best, folks. To no, we can actually understand this and we can pick up on suboptimal behaviors and these sorts of things and do something about it.
Yeah. There's so much in that answer, and I want to go back to a couple of things, but
standing out in your sector is becoming harder than ever. Lots of people are making noise, saturating the market with the same old droll tones. So if you want to stand out, it's time to start a podcast. Yes, there's loads of podcasts out there, but how many of them are actually in your niche? Do any of them speak to your perspective on the market? I didn't think so. Podcasting not only sets you apart as an innovative thinker in your market, it is great content for repurposing. Here at SearchStat, we help you become the voice of your industry. We can stretch your content and turn it into a content goldmine, leveling up your personal brands and recruitment marketing in the process. Sounds good, doesn't it? Well, to find out more, head over to searchstat.co.uk/podcasts.
But that last point in particular, how we think about transforming the way that businesses think about the value of hiring and consider the impact of bad hire. I mean, the bad hire calculators and recruiters who talk about the retention of their placements, I think is always a really interesting one, because beyond the first 6 months, so many other environmental type factors come into play and force the hand. But if we even if we just do that, if we're able to give more accountability to hiring managers and organizations and recruitment consultants around quality of hire, then that surely has an impact on expectations, which hopefully then drives the uptake in technology, right? So what I'd love to imagine is that we've got one agency using Metaview or one internal recruiter using Metaview, and the business is then looking at the agencies saying, well, why don't you use this, and what kind of insight are you giving us, and why can't you answer the questions in these kinds of ways? And so everybody's standards are driven up by that expectation. I love to kind of imagine a future where people move on from environments where they've seen Metaview or had access to Metaview, and then they're then saying, well, why doesn't everybody have this?
I'd love to see that too, and we do hear that obviously anecdotally as well. The one thing I just want to come back to, though, actually, Ben, is all these things everything we're talking about is really important and should happen. What we're finding consistently, though, is the best way to take a step into actually adopting AI in a way that pragmatically impacts how you work is to focus on things that make your life easier. That is actually the starting point in all of these, because a lot of the benefits we're talking about here, they're quite downstream. They're like, okay, we'll benefit from this in N years' time because we'll be able to map our interviews against the talent and this sort of thing. Totally important. But to start the journey, to say, hey, we're starting now, we're going to start to capture this data, or I personally am going to start to capture this data from my own candidates. You sort of want the immediate payoff. The time we think about it, I'm sure sort of it's a concept that your listeners are familiar with too, the concept of time to value. And so it's better when time to value is low. And so that's why what we think that the AI industry will find, i.e. the software companies who are building AI products will find, and certainly what we're finding, is that the best way to gain admission and sort of start the journey towards these sort of this utopia that we're talking about, of course it will never be truly utopian, but this idea is to solve some immediate problems right now. And these are things that might even seem small, but actually, if you take them off the table, you're making a real impact, a difference in people's lives. So yeah, I think these things are really important. Right now, the way our strategy around how we're leveraging AI, and we sort of think of ourselves as obviously we're sort of a technology company that sits in between AI and recruiting in many ways. Like, how can we, given AI is literally changing every single day, like there's new releases, new models, new capabilities emerging all the time. What are these capabilities that can make a difference for how people recruit tomorrow? Like, if we build something tomorrow, it'll make people's lives better. That's how we think about things, but all the while holding in mind that the actual like long-term consequences might be far greater. And of course we need to be wise to that, but actually it's not really for us to worry about every single day. Every single day I just want to think, hey, how can we make it so that, I get half an hour back in my day to do X or Y, or I get much more clarity of thought around the candidates I want to submit and why, or I can just show up to my client far more effectively because I actually feel like I'm informed and not scrabbling around to think about what candidates to present to them sort of 5 minutes before my meeting,
Yeah, totally. It makes sense, and I see that in lots of ways. Maybe even in my own work as well, where productivity is a bit of a Trojan horse to get something bigger and with a longer lasting impact into businesses, and kind of convince people to make the investment when they realize that literally tomorrow they could do their job in an hour less.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get it. Let's then, if we can, we're going to go on a bit of a limb. I want to just work through with you, if we can, over the next couple of minutes, just maybe 2 or 3 things that agency recruiters could do with something like Metaview, a platform, ideally Metaview, that would enable them to see very quick returns. So we've talked about productivity, and I think that makes sense. You've given those 2 really good examples in terms of database recall from that unstructured data and being able to pull historic information out, but also being able to answer hiring manager questions or follow-up questions kind of in the moment. That's something that if I had that tool working for me in my screening calls today, I could use in conversation tomorrow. I think there's got to also, hasn't there, be a play for ways in which recruiters can make more placements directed by helping influence decisions or support decisions by hiring managers in favor of their candidates over others.
Yeah.
Or at least when they're thinking about screening and providing shortlists, presumably there's a good use case for supplying some kind of data along with the shortlists that supports the approach there.
Yeah, totally. There's more. I mean, obviously we're developing the product all the time and improving it. So the way the things that you described there, like the selection of the shortlist, let's say, or the maybe selection of the shortlist. Let's focus on that. For us, that's still a heavily human judgment. Now, we may take some strides to provide some tools that help you make that human judgment, but I think at the end of the day, that's literally going to be one of the things that, frankly, separates a bad recruiter from a good recruiter from a great recruiter. Is like, how did I land my intake call with this client to understand what they're looking for? Was I able to extract that information? Like, those are still the human things, and creating that shortlist is going to be you. We'll try and help. There's many ways that people obviously use Metaview right now to help themselves with that. But because it's so human, it's right for that to be the judgment of the recruiter. It's still like, we give you the tools, but it's your job to go and do that, and we're sort of quite happy with that. The things where people get sort of the immediate benefit. One is, I won't sort of go over old things, so we've talked about a few, but one that sort of really takes Metaview from to the next level for agency folks especially, is around the fact that you can instruct our AI how you want your notes to be written. So what I mean by that is, if you went to use Metaview tomorrow, you'd get our default notes. This is the information that we think is most important from this. You can then prompt it about the ways you want it to change and all these sorts of things. So you still have total ability to edit it, but it's our initial take. And of course, every time you have to tell it what to do differently, that's a bit of time that you're spending having to tell it what to do. So what we want is for you to actually come to Metaview after your call, and literally you have the exact information that you wanted, given the role you were hiring for, the client you were hiring for, and all these things automatically there. And so what are sort of more customers who've been using Metaview, for a slightly longer time, get into the habit of doing is creating what we call custom templates, which you can sort of think of as like a set of instructions that you're giving the AI for how to write the notes after every call. So it's not just playing out, hey, here's all the things you spoke about and here's what they said about each of those things. It's actually bucketing things by themes, if that's what you want it to do, or pulling out, tracing their sort of career arc in like one sort of bullet point summary, or whatever it might be. You can essentially instruct our AI, hey, every time when I come, make sure the notes are in this format. And if it's for this role, use that format as well, but add these two things as well. So like you essentially set it up so that you are just massively reducing the amount that you need to edit things. And again, if you're in a world where let's say you've got a short list that you need to submit in, 2 weeks time, you're not always going to do all the write-ups right after each call. You're going to think, okay, I'm coming up to the deadline now. Now I need to think about which ones do I really want to think through. And so if you can go to each of those and actually all of the notes are already exactly the way you'd want them, the thing that you'd have to spend tons of time doing, you're in a much better position to then just select the ones you want to shortlist. Of course, do the last 10% of the editing, add your nuance, add your perspective and your judgment to those notes. And so that's where we see, people, literally getting hours and hours back in their working week. The predictions we have are essentially vary between, it's a bit of a wide range just based on different roles, but minimum that people say it saves them is around 6 hours per week. So you can think of that's pretty much a working day. And the highest we've heard is 20 hours per week, so like half of your week back. Now mileage varies. I think it depends on how you work at the moment. I'm not saying, hey, everyone's going to get 20 hours back in their week, but in that 6 to 10 hours range is very common that we hear people are getting that amount of time back. So it's very significant.
When I think about the agency model, the classic agency model, and I have question marks about it, but the classic agency model is that new recruits are brought into a resourcing role, and vast proportions of their time are therefore spent screening candidates and doing initial stage screens, and those conversations, or that those kind of they have more of those conversations because they don't have the experience perhaps of a more seasoned recruiter who can be a bit more, make judgments prior to deciding who to screen. I actually think that is an advantage that kind of rookies have, is that they ultimately end up screening everybody and not wanting to make judgment calls before they've spoken. But I imagine in particular, I'm thinking about executive search firms or any kind of recruitment business actually, where you've got a pool of resources doing lots of screening work, where this just becomes I can easily see where someone like that, or someone working in that kind of setup, would be able to save, the best part of half a week's work. And in addition to that, actually, their managers or the senior team around them can then kind of have a greater confidence that those screens have been done effectively and done well, and the information is stored, and you don't need to worry about the accuracy of what's being captured or the validity of what's being captured or tracked. So
that's big.
It's kind of all
funny anecdote we hear. So this is not like a founding insight or anything, but pre-COVID, of course, it was very common to be able to like walk the floor, hear just like overhear one side of the conversation, how people are talking about things, and maybe pick up on things, take people aside, coach someone else, something like this. Of course, that's we of course have lots of clients who do work in the office very frequently, but we also have a lot who almost do most of their work remotely, and you've completely lost that. You're just like not overhearing anything at all, and so there's almost like that serendipity element to it as well, which I think there could be interesting ways to bake that into the product a bit more. Like how do we, like maybe there's going to be parts of the sort of the conversation track that our customers are much better placed than our AI to identify might be interesting. So, how do we surface some of those things in a serendipitous way is quite an interesting product challenge for some time in the future as well.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that kind of use of AI as well on kind of my side of the business, in terms of helping recruiters build out their revenue generating, their kind of go-to-market and their sales function, really looking at conversational analytics and being able to pull out parts of the sales conversation to see how well that's been structured, and sending, for example, a series of a sales call reduced down to edited clips that then gets passed back to the manager, and the manager can listen through and within a minute get a sense of how well that call was run. by listening to maybe 3 or 4 different questions that the recruiter's been asking. So I think there's a really exciting future for all of this, and I'm really grateful for you to kind of walking us through it. And hopefully, my intention for this episode, as much as anything else, as well as no doubt leading to Metaview getting in the hands of more recruiters and the people listening to this, but actually to invite recruiters to really think about what are the opportunities, what are the parts of their role that with the right support, the right platform, the right technology, they could be doing differently, better, and the ways that they can help their clients get better outcomes, better results, which in turn make them more valuable to those businesses.
Yeah. I think that's a really,
if nothing else, this conversation is a really good catalyst for those kinds of thoughts.
And I would totally echo that. Like even like away from Metaview, I obviously working in AI, sort of encourage my friends who are in different industries to really be thoughtful about making sure you're not sort of seeing it as just like something that's happening on Twitter or something, and like on LinkedIn thought posts. Like there's real stuff happening, and even if it's just like spending more time with ChatGPT or something like that, I think everyone should do it, because there's a lot of intuition building that people should be doing right now around, hey, how it's going to be us that's going to determine, us as in people that do the work, that's going to determine how these technologies change how we work. So if it's not you, it's going to be people like you. It's going to be your fellow recruiters who decide this is the way they want to use it, and then that'll become best practice. So this is the time when all that's getting worked out. And I think honing your intuition around how AI can help you, because it's such a new technology, is a really, really good idea. And I would say more recruiting specifically, I would say a really important thing to sort of disabuse yourself of is the idea that the AI is going to be disruptive. Things are not going to be the same in the future as they are now, and that means that is disruption. And some people do really well out of it, and it's going to negatively impact others, and that's just the reality. We obviously don't need to go into that in like super detail. But one thing I would, from a sort of negative consequence perspective, would try and remove the sort of like lessen the weight of in one's mind is AI is going to be there to make decisions for us on who to hire. Like that's all roads. Whenever you're talking about AI and recruiting, they always lead to that, and it's like, that's going to be the last thing. Actually, there's so much about how we work that we all get frustrated about that would be great if we didn't have to do anymore. And guess what? There's a fundamentally new technology that's now highly likely going to be able to do at least some of those things. So let's focus on that stuff first, and worry about these more existential problems later, because they're a long way off, if even problems at this point.
Yeah, it's a brilliant place for us to end this. So, as I say, thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything that you feel you'd like to add, share with the audience, ask me, or any direction that you'd like to point us in of places we can go next to continue this conversation, Siadhal?
I've loved this conversation. So yeah, thanks so much, Ben. I sometimes when you do these pods, you sort of get the questions in advance. I'm like, that sort of ruins it. Like, I want to have a conversation. There's loads of things we can dig into. So yeah, great conversation. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for running it. Listen, if you want to learn more about Metaview, go to our website. It's metaview.ai. If you're more just curious about starting to develop your thoughts around how AI more broadly can affect you, then we have a really good newsletter called the AI Recruiters AI Digest. So you should check that out as well. That's a good resource, just once per week, just a few of the key things that have happened in AI that either are directly affecting recruiting or might affect recruiting, depending on how you think about it. So that's probably a pretty good thing to check out too. And yeah, I would say the other thing is, one of the reasons I was really keen to come on this pod is we did start with, when we started the company, we focused on in-house teams, but we've had so much success, so much impact with agency recruitment firms and exec search recruiting firms in the last 12 months that it's become a really important, frankly, focus for us now. And I mean that in terms of working out how we can make the products even better for the particular workflows that are unique to agency recruiters. So I'm actually really game for learning. Like, literally my number one job right now is learning more about this world, and I've been doing that for a good few months. So I feel like I'm getting there, but it's nowhere near as much as I know about in-house. So if there are folks who want to connect with me on LinkedIn are willing to sort of share more about how they think about their work and their workflow, then that's really valuable to me too. So I would appreciate that.
Well, you've done a great job on that, because I think you've got recruiters pretty well nailed with some of the things that you've shared today. Good stuff. There'll be links to everything that you've just mentioned in the show notes. So click on the show notes if you want to follow up on anything that Siadhal's just mentioned. I would massively endorse and underscore the newsletter and the blog resources on the website too. There's a load of really interesting stuff there. It's not there's really rich content that isn't just about promoting the work that Metaview do, but really talking about that conversation we've been having today about the role of AI in recruitment and how recruiters can think and feel about the future. So I would encourage everybody to go and check those out. But for now, Siadhal, thank you so much for being on the show. You've been a great guest, and I look forward to speaking with you again in the future.
Thanks, Ben. Right back at you.
Just one last thing from me. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, hit like, hit follow, and consider leaving a review. Your feedback is really greatly appreciated. We're still looking to perfect the format and to think about how we can make this show even more valuable for all of our audience. So as you leave feedback, we pick it up and we'll be including it in everything we do going forwards. And if you want to get closer to the show, to ask me questions or hear about upcoming guests and put questions to them, then head to the show notes where you'll find a link to the Recruiting Better community. From there, you'll be able to get our newsletter with regular updates and send me any messages or feedback that you want me to receive.